Hey Emma,
Yes, Val.
what do you call it when somebody always opts for the evil route in a game, despite stigma and mockery from their friends and family?
What do you call it?
Bravely infamous by default! Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
See, it was a joke about gaming this time.
Yeah? Yeah, it was. You're right.
And referencing something that's part of one of the games.
Mm-hmm.
So it was funny.
Very funny.
I'm your can't ever commit to taking default turns host, Madelyn.
I'm your bravely choose to... yeah, I'm Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. It's May. Is there a video game equivalent of the... I mean, I guess we don't want to use Timberlake anymore, but is there a video game equivalent for the May thing? We need one.
You do the Devil May Cry logo, but you take out. Yeah.
There it is. Good. Unless you're me, in which case it's Devil... Wait, I feel like we pronounced it differently when we did that show. Mine was like Devil May Cry. So which actually should be my pronunciation.
Yeah.
Where it's really emphasizing the uncertainty of whether the devil will cry.
Exactly.
We're not talking about Devil May Cry this episode, though. Folks, we're actually, as you might have picked up from the quote-unquote joke I told, talking about Infamous and Bravely Default 2. So let's make our first karma choice here. I'll take the good option, and I'll go to the old game as I'm supposed to, instead of jumping to the new game out of order. And start
choice.
Talking about Infamous.
Yeah, tell us about Infamous.
Yeah, so Infamous, it's an action-adventure game. Ever since we've done the genre episode, every time I have to say it's an action-adventure game, I cringe a little inside.
It's a superhero game. It's
a superhero simulator game. From Sucker Punch for PS3. It came out in 2009. And you play in Infamous as the infamous, or famous, if you go the hero route, I guess, Cole McGrath. And you're just a bike messenger in fake New York City, also known as Empire City. Fake New York City with a lot of above-ground trains in Manhattan, which isn't really a thing, but whatever. Who you're delivering a package, and it turns out that package triggers an explosion, which throws the city into chaotic times, and also gives you electric superpowers. You become like a literal human embodiment of electricity. And so with those powers, you try to restore order to the city, which is also in several of the Infamous games battling like a plague or an epidemic, which I read and I went, ooh. No more epidemic stories for a while, I think.
Yeah, I watched like a little like look back at Infamous and Infamous 2, and like one of the things was like, yeah, it seemed realistic. There's all these people, heads sitting on the ground, not wearing a mask. I was like, oh boy.
Also, they closed off the bridges, which would never have happened.
Yeah.
Clearly did not ever happen. Anyway.
But yeah, Cole's not the only person who gained power from these MacGuffins. So a lot of the series is like going through and like, being the opposing other people with powers as well. I was gonna say, going against people who are using them for evil, but a lot of the story of Infamous is you can choose to go down the good or bad route, so I guess you're still stopping the same people, but like for different motives.
You have different reasons you don't want to work with these people.
Yes.
So yeah.
Although I do think it's funny that it's called Infamous, considering that they decided the good route is the canon one in the first game, since Infamous 2 follows the good routes ending.
Yeah. And as we've talked about on the show before, and I'm sure as we'll talk about more today, obviously people overall, despite karma systems always being this kind of flashy thing for games, especially I feel like 2009 was and that kind of general era of games, like the PS3 era of games, was very much into, you can be evil if you want to. And then people said, that's cool, I won't.
Yeah. It does sound like, at least in the first game, and then it becomes a little less like this as you continue through the series. But in the first game, there's at least some choices where, like, while you can identify, like, the good and bad option, they're not, like, the bad option is like, well, you can see the justification for doing it, right? It's not like, murder or spare, that sort of thing.
No, I saw some discussion from the developers about how some of their philosophy behind that was that they wanted the evil route to be easier, with the idea that being good is sort of hard and more challenging. So that certainly comes into play. Of what you're doing isn't necessarily like blatantly evil at all times. It's just not lazy, but it's just not as hard as being like 100% pure hero.
Yeah, in the sort of summary I was watching, I saw one example of a choice you could make, and it's like, I didn't get the full context of it, but you have to like close this pipe that's like spewing like black tar that's like
that's connected to somebody else in the game, I feel like, isn't it? Somebody else has black tar powers. Yeah,
but you have to like, it's like in the water, right, and you're like doing something with it. So there's one where you can choose to either like close it yourself or get a civilian to do it for you, and it's not like a fatal thing. It just sort of gives you like the effect on the screen, like when you're hit on, is like, like a bad trip basically, and you're not as powerful. So if you do it yourself, you get hit, and then you have to deal with those effects on your gameplay. Whereas if you have the civilian do it, you continue to play as normal, which I think fits into that. Is like, but also like that makes sense, right? Like, if it's your job to take care of this situation, like you can see the logic of not wanting to get hit with the black tar. But then again, just like you said, the developers said that's the easier option, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Do you prioritize your continued health and well-being, hopefully then to protect the majority of people, or do you prioritize this one civilian here, right now, under your protection? So it's interesting. It also comes out like pretty much simultaneously to another superhero game that is basically this, exactly, called Prototype. It's also a new superhero running around fake New York City. When I mentioned this game to Click Like Boyfriend, he was like, wait a minute, I think I played that. And I was like, I don't think you did. It was a PlayStation 3 exclusive. And it turned out that what he had played was, in fact, Prototype. And he had just merged the two games in his head. Understandably, they are similar enough games that some reviewer reviewed them both at the same time and was like, they're so close together in quality. The only way I could decide is if each studio did a drawing of the other guy's protagonist. And then they did. And he was like, these are still really close together, but I guess I'll give it to Prototype. Which I found amusing.
Well, you can kind of tell which one became a longer lasting
Yep.
impact.
Which one was
memory.
Infamous and which one was merely a prototype, you mean?
Exactly. I don't know if Infamous was ever infamous exactly, but I understand your joke.
Yes. Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
It appears pretty frequently in kind of the mid-tier of a lot of the best of PS3 lists. Like, it's never number one, but it, depending on how long the list is, it's often somewhere in the middle or just cracking the top 10 or something like that, as this sort of pretty successful superhero sandbox. Now, it's not
Infamous or Infamous 2, because
depends on the list. I've seen both. Not both on the same list. That would be a lot of Infamous, but I've seen it depending. But it is a sandbox. I wouldn't call it an open world exactly. I mean, it is. You can run around, but
it's an open city.
It's an open city for
different areas,
but like not in the sense of if you made a game like Infamous now, it would have to be like you can do all of this in any order, like that kind of thing. Whereas here, there's definitely a progression of powers that are necessary to complete things.
Sure.
Which is part of the point of the game. The mechanic of it not being totally open, supporting this idea of this being a game about becoming a superhero, not just immediately being like, I'm a all-powerful Marvel man.
Yeah.
It does also, something about Infamous feels very out of what the superhero movies of this time period were, to me. Like, it tastes very much of Nolan, Batman, relative to, not that the Marvel movies don't have their darkness.
I do think that's a little funny, just because I think you can draw a lot of comparisons, not just between Infamous and Prototype, whatever that is, but between, like, the, Arkham Asylum, Arkham, whatever games. So.
It's just part of this kind of dark superhero era, I think, of, superheroes can do bad things. That was very hip in this, like, aughts time. And now you look at, like Avengers, right? And it's much... That's not the story de rigueur anymore, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely still edgy superheroes over on the side.
Of course. They're not gone. I don't mean to say they're gone. I breathed in some dust.
Oh, no.
Okay. Of course, I don't mean to say they're gone. I just mean, I think that the cultural fascination with superheroes has moved much more toward the kind of multiverse, like lots of heroes crossing over, Easter eggs, big teams kind of vibe, as opposed to the, it's moved from the Batman obsession to the, like, X-Men, Avengers vibe.
I also think it's just a time in video games when, I mean, I say that as if we are not still here.
Right.
But in which we really liked the, gritty, dark aesthetic of Worlds. And that's definitely reflected. Although at least Infamous has some nicely colored effects to sort of break out of the grimy backgrounds.
Definitely. And to be clear, I mean, the story of Infamous is super pulpy, right? Even though you have the ability to be a hero who does bad things, like, I was reading it and I was like, this does remind me of synopses of, like, certain X-Men stories, right? Of, like, ultimately, so in the game, right, like, you move through different areas of fake New York, fighting with these various gangs, basically, that have sprung up with people who have also become conduits, which is our fun name for superheroes. Every world must have its own fun name for superheroes.
Yep.
They can't just be cool people. They have to be something like conduits. It's like zombies and heroes cannot be called zombies and heroes, can they?
No.
Anyway, so you move through and you like fight these 3 different gangs led by these other superhero villain types. And then the big bad turns out to be this guy named Kessler, who, spoilers for a game that, folks, you will not be able to play. Infamous does not have a remaster. I think you can buy it on PS3. I didn't actually look.
Pretty sure you can. It's definitely on PlayStation 3. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to buy it on PlayStation 3.
What I mean to say is, do you have a PS3 that works, listener? Maybe you do. I barely do.
The store isn't closing anymore, so you can buy it.
Yes, you can. It just won't play on you can't play it on your PS4. That's what I mean to say. You need to have a system now that is like almost as old as Infamous to be able to play it. Anyway, tangent. Yay, PS3 store. Hurrah. Okay, back. So it turns out, so I'm spoiling this game. Cool. The big bad is, in fact, you! From the alternate timeline future! Which is so, like, on the one hand, it's so very JRPG, which is going to come back in our second game. On the entirely other hand, it's so comic book. This, like, there's this alternate universe and someone's back from the future and that kind of thing. It's interesting to me, these, like, two incredibly disparate storytelling genres and that crossover in particular. So, anyway, the big bad is you after, like, your wife and children were murdered by an evil supervillain and you've come back to stop him by also being a supervillain, I guess. And then in the end, you can kind of, like, side with him or not, basically.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I don't think comics and JRPGs are that much different, They've all got, way too many characters. Incredibly confusing timelines. You have to buy, 4 separate series to keep up with one character's plotline, It's got a lot in common.
Look, I agree with you. I just think I think they are siloed off from each other, particularly now, right? Particularly now in the past, 15 years or whatever, that superheroes have reclaimed their place very much in the cultural mainstream in the West. I mean, in everywhere. But, yeah, that the genres have a lot in common, despite the fact that you would probably not point to someone who enjoyed the Avengers movies as someone who's like, yes, you are going to love Octopath Traveler, or something like that.
That's fair.
Even though, like, a lot of the same elements, right? But just not, you wouldn't necessarily make that obvious cultural connection. Anyway, yeah, so just like this very pulpy comic book setup where you can be a guardian, champion, or hero on the good side, and thug, outlaw, infamous on the evil side. And as Emma said, even though the game is called Infamous, most people pick the good route.
Plus, that's just what the sequel follows.
Right.
So.
Well, but the sequel, I didn't necessarily read about this for Infamous 2, although I imagine it was a similar thought process. But I did read for Infamous Second Son, which is the second sequel, so the second sequel, I think, diverges. What am I trying to say? Infamous 2, the ending options you have diverge much more wildly than in Infamous 1. In Infamous 1, you can kind of, like, choose to embrace being a hero or choose to embrace being a villain, but it doesn't necessarily have huge, wide, world-ranging consequences. Like, it has consequences for Empire City, but not for the human race. Infamous 2 ends much more, again, plague trigger warning, I guess. But Infamous 2 ends much more with, like, you can either let the plague kill all the humans, or you can start a new conduit world, or you can stop the plague, but kill all the conduits, even the ones that don't know that they're conduits. And so obviously that, like, Infamous 2 picks up from the good ending, but, like, you could probably stitch together some kind of narrative thread that's like, but really, he's a bad guy, or something like that.
It would be a little difficult because your physical appearance does drastically change, depending on which route you're going, as well as the color of your powers as well.
Fair enough. But yeah, clearly for the third game, they had to make a clear choice as to what the future was going to be. And so that they ultimately looked at the trophy data and saw that 78% of people had picked the good ending, and so decided to go with the humans. The humans live after all, and Cole is dead. So you get to play as a new guy. It's also a climbing game.
Yeah, lots of traversal options.
What do you think it is about video games that makes us want to climb?
We can. You can't do it in real life. Most of the time.
Most of the time.
You can sure try, Wouldn't advise it unless you're particularly trained in scaling buildings. But, in games, you can do it, Also, Cole can, jump. Infamous 2, you have a even wider range of traversal options that can, just keep you in the air for very long periods of time. You can't really fly exactly, but if you, chain together different powers, you can make yourself move fast, like flying. 1 is a little bit more limited, but you can definitely still climb buildings and stuff like that.
Well, apparently they had an employee whose job was to make sure everything was climbable. That was this person's job. I hope that they're credited as climb czar or something like that, because it was an important job.
Was this they had to make sure everything was programmed so that Cole could climb on it, or was it a generalized thing you have to look at and be this doesn't look climbable? Let's was it a producer specifically tasked with climbing tasks?
This was a one-way throwaway sentence in an interview, so I don't know. What do you think would be better?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of work in making sure you're programming everything to be climbable, so I can see that as a job. But also, I can also see someone being okay, let's get engineering on this piece of wall, but this wall doesn't look like it's climbable. We want players to think that it's climbable, so let's get art to put some stuff on this wall. Let's get, some play testers in, see if they climb it. They think it's climbable. That's also a job.
I hear you pitching yourself for the Infamous remake.
I will make sure things get climbable.
Sucker Punch, are you listening? Emma is here to be your climb empress if you need her.
Is there an Infamous remake, or were you just saying
No,
that?
there's not an Infamous remake, to my knowledge.
I meant, yes, being developed. I know there's not one now.
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. Just making sure, because you threw it out there.
It's sort of surprising to me.
They're busy with their samurai game.
I guess, but remasters are where the money is.
Someone else can do it.
Why? Fine. That's fine. Sucker Punch, whoever you're outsourcing this to, send Emma's little reel there to them. It also comes out at a big time for climbing games. Assassin's Creed comes out a few years before. In addition to a big, binary good and evil time in games, the late aughts also a big climb time in games.
We love to climb.
I don't really...
We need to climb.
I get that it's we can't do it in the real world, but there's a lot of things that we can't do in the real world that we aren't clamoring for in our games. So it's interesting to me that it's climbing is such a thing.
Go high. Take shortcuts.
Go high.
Fling ourselves off buildings. All sorts of, fun things you can't do in real life.
I'll also throw out there that the protagonist of Second Son is Native American, apparently, which is dope. I don't know if anyone on the team was, so maybe I should be saying, I don't know, that is dope. But when I read it out, it was oh.
I did see some, morality choices in that one that made me go, oh, okay. I think there was one that was literally, save the youth, corrupt the youth. Wow, okay.
What about my option for saving the youth through corruption?
Exactly. Come on now, game.
Maybe this is something we should address in our mashup, but, there has to be a better way to do morality systems, man.
I do at least appreciate that, I appreciate and don't appreciate, but I think it works for this game, that it really does encourage you to, like, pick a route and go with it, right? Because the more powerful powers are unlocked when you reach a certain threshold of your alignment, I guess.
You can switch, though. I mean, it certainly encourages you to go a route, but you don't get locked out of the other route.
Yeah, but it does want you to be, like, all the way on one side or all the way on the other, because then you get access to much stronger powers. That obviously makes the game. I don't know if you could be in the middle and, like, do the final boss fight and whatever, you know?
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, as a player, I get anxious when I don't know what my choice is doing. Right? On the other hand, that is more what life is like, but I also, sometimes I'm like, oh, what does this dialogue option do? And then it's the evil choice. It's like, no. So on that side, I appreciate the binary Knights of the Old Republic morality system of this era. But also, is there a way to do this that's better? Or that doesn't read so cheesy when I read about it anyway?
Sure. I mean, I honestly think from just the limited things I've read that the first game does the morality system the best, and then it's sort of become more simple in terms of choices from there. Which maybe is just, like, feedback that, like, people want to know that they're doing one thing or the other, or I'm sure it's easier to program if you don't really have to take into account players, like, flip-flopping back and forth every choice.
See, maybe I would at least like, if we're gonna go the D&D route, if I'm flip-flopping back and forth, I'd like my appearance to be chaotic evil, as opposed to just neutral, whatever. Or if I'm always evil, but only in, like, but I also follow the laws. I'm evil only in a non-law breaking way, that I can be a lawful evil. I'd like more character appearance customizations.
Sure.
And if I'm going to be allowed to flip-flop back and forth however I want in a way that doesn't actually really make sense, I'd like for that to be reflected in my alignment.
Again, though, like, all that's very cool. You could not make it.
Make them work harder for me. No. Bring in Emma as the climb empress. She can manage this for you.
No, I can make sure things get climbable, and that's it. Otherwise, you're on your own. Yeah, like, it's nice to think about, like, oh, all these different morality options and, like, falling into, like, 9 different categories, but it's just not feasible to develop all that out and have all of those be at all satisfying.
Fair enough. All you would have to do is...
You have to have, like, 9 different power trees, 9 different, like, storylines, even if they're only slightly different from each other. 9 different appearances.
Change, like, chaotic evil would just add yo at the end of every line.
Then you have to record 9 different dialogue takes for everything.
No, you just would have to record the same dialogue and then a lot of different yos, and you just add the yo on.
I don't like that.
The normal one would be like, I think I'm going to kill all of humanity. And the chaotic one would just go, I think I'm going to kill all of humanity. Yo.
It is chaotic.
Look, Ghost of Tsushima made a lot of money. They can do it. Oh well. Fine. You're right.
Ghost of Tsushima apparently also did not have a very satisfying morality system, so... Or it didn't really. It seemed to be a thing. You just have a final choice at the end.
It's just impossible to make one. That's my ultimate, ruling on morality systems. That it's hard to do.
I just think they have to be significantly different enough that it's worth playing again.
Fair enough. Basically. Yeah. That makes sense. Harkens back to our choice in games episode. Yep. Is that why you picked that? Were you thinking about... Okay. I keep trying to...
I explained why I picked it in the episode. It did not have a deep reason for it.
I know, but I was trying to hack your subconscious there.
Nope.
Speaking of things that don't have deep reasons for anything, shall we talk about Bravely Default 2?
Let's do it.
Alright. So Bravely Default 2, not to be confused with Bravely Second, whatever the subtitle is the third game
player
in the Bravely Default series. So remember when we said that comic books and JRPGs are the same and they are confusingly laid out in terms of story? Here it is. The jokes have already been made. There's no new joke you could make about this. I'm saying that to myself in addition to you, listener. Bravely Default 2, the third game. So it's part of the Bravely Default series, which when I was reading about this game, I was like, why do I feel like I know so much about this game? Bravely Default. What's familiar about this? When did we talk about it? I was at first worried that we had already talked about Bravely Default as an old game, but then I realized it was not old enough for that.
No.
And then I realized censorship in games. That's when we talked about Bravely Default.
You're right. We did talk about it a little bit there.
So we won't talk. I don't think that was actually a thing for Bravely Default 2. Fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, depending on your opinion on the first one.
If you want to call the Scottish accents censorship, I guess.
The Scottish accents are just aggression. The accents were just like...
I do want to say before we... Madeline said this is the third game in the Bravely Default series. That's like calling Final Fantasy... It's a little bit like calling Final Fantasy 15 the 30th game in the Final Fantasy series, you know?
I mean, it is.
Because Bravely Default 2 is not related to Bravely Default or Bravely Second in a story sense.
For what I was reading, I don't think that's... So you can definitely play this without having played the other two. Apparently there are some connections. In the same way as in Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
So if you've played the first two games, you will find some things interesting about how this ultimately turns out, I think. I don't know. I didn't actually read... There's not a lot of spoiler reviews out there yet, because it's a pretty new game. So Bravely Default, the original, came out in 2012... in Japan anyway. And then Bravely Second came out in 2015 in Japan, 2016. And then Bravely Default 2 just came out in February. And this time, so the first ones were made by Silicon Studio. And this one is from Clay Tech Works and Square.
Mostly you want to be looking for these games. The producer is Asano Tomoya, who's also the producer on Octopath Traveler, and I believe on Project Triangle Strategy. So this is from a dedicated team that have a vision of what things should look like and the sort of style of it. And then the development team that actually works on them can change over time.
Yeah. Although Claytech Works is from former Silicon people. I was sort of surprised at first. I was like, oh, they replaced them. Yikes. But it's similar people. And the leadership team. It's Square's traditional RPG team.
Yes, exactly.
So this is the one I played this time. They've got a demo. The Bravely Default games always have multiple demos. Which is cool. Is good. It's not a game I'm gonna buy. But I appreciate, especially for games that, presumably for the foreseeable future are Switch targeted, meaning they will always cost $60 forever. Having a demo feels both very humane and also a very good sales strategy.
With Octopath and Triangle Strategy, they had demos for years before it was planned to come out. So they're big into demos.
Yeah.
For various purposes, for playtesting or just to get excited about it. The demo for Bravely Default 2 is significantly harder, apparently, than it would actually be at that point of the game, so that you can try all the combat out. So
here's the thing. I think I played a different demo than that demo. I think that was the first demo that came out and got a lot of press last March. And now they've released sometime in the summer a final demo, because I did have difficulty options at the beginning. I could have chosen easy, normal, hard.
Must have been a slightly different one then, yeah.
That one was like 10 hours of playtime. This one is only 5, so I've been punished for waiting.
5 is still a lot for a demo.
I know. It's more than I played. So I played like an hour or 2 of this overall, so 40% of my demo time-ish. It sure is a JRPG, folks.
Yep.
If you aren't familiar with the series, first of all, the story summary is, it sure is a JRPG, folks. You play as, with the game, I was confused at first. I was like, who's Seth? When I was reading the character descriptions online, and I was like, oh, right, Seth. Or, if you're me, Horse Descartes.
What?
I named my character Horse Descartes.
Oh, you can name your character in this?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
At least in the demo. I don't know about the real game, but in the demo you can name your character, and I was so inspired by default that I was like, oh, I should do something that deals with that, and so I didn't want to put Descartes before the horse, so I did Horse Descartes.
I'm pretty sure you can't name your characters in the first game, so...
Well, I've exercised my freedom of choice, and I did indeed choose the evil route. Thanks. By naming it Horse.
As always.
Anyway, look, I can't name anyone Champ McDude anymore. I wish Champ McDude hadn't been such an icon, because then I could have used that name forever, but...
Oh, well.
Here we are. So yeah, you, and you gaggle of companions, Seth, and for a little bit I thought they were named after Western singers, because you've Elvis and Adele, and there's also Gloria. But I don't think there are. I just think Elvis and Adele had a scene, and I was like, oh, that's funny. And you're all, like, Seth is, like, washed up on the shore of a strange land with little memory of who he is, and Gloria's kingdom of Musa has been destroyed in bad times, and bad things are happening throughout the world, and you all are going to be the heroes who put it all back together, and you discover that you are literally... the heroes of light. So, like, it's just, like, it's a JRPG. From everything I read, the story is not that much to write home about. The original Bravely Default at least had some kind of a twisty twist that seemingly was polarizing, but mostly liked. This one, you're not in this for the story, probably.
I know the first Bravely Default starts out with, like, a scene... that, like, uses your camera.
Well, that's scary.
Like, it's like, she, like, runs around on it. I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining this, but I have, like, a clear memory of that in my mind. And then she, like, falls through, like, a hole in space or something. So it's a little weird. Anyway, the Bravely Default was literally first started development as a sequel to Final Fantasy IV Heroes of Light. So I feel like you can definitely see that in its concept
there
and
are
story.
Indeed 4 Heroes of Light.
Yes.
IGN described this particular game as, quote, a refrigerator magnet poetry set of Square Enix cliches, which I feel like captures that pretty well. Anyway, the defining mechanic and the justification for the bizarro name of the series is the Brave Default combat system, where basically, and I did not prove to be very good at doing this strategically and playing the demo, you can either, like, attack and do magic and stuff normally, where you have the one turn, and, like, your turn, it, like, eventually comes back around, right? You've, like, the counters until it's your turn, the meters. Or you can use default, which is basically guard, but it also stockpiles a turn. So everyone's counter starts at 0, or starts at 1 if you get the jump on the enemy. And the more of those you stockpile, the more attacks you can do in a row without penalty. So you use that by activating Brave, and that allows you to chain a bunch of attacks. And you can even use Brave to, like, accumulate Brave debt. Basically, you can go into the negatives. It just means you have to wait longer for your turn to come back up again. which, resolves some of the truly frustrating things about some JRPGs. The constant struggle of, like, I revive a character, they get killed again before it's their turn. I revive a character, they get killed again before it's their turn. Here, you can, buy a bunch of extra turns to revive all of your characters. And you never run into that. This helped me in a particularly hard battle in the demo. It was great. So, however, it is also this very classic JRPG thing, and this is something I'd love to chat about a little bit, in that it's very, very grindy. It's a long game, because it's a JRPG, but a lot of it is long because you have to do a lot of grinding to get your characters to where they need to be and to level up their jobs, which is basically the class system in this game.
Yes, you can make them wear funny outfits.
Yeah, I really thought of you when I saw that. I was like, this is for Emma.
I do like when I can make characters wear funny outfits. I do feel like if I played this game, I would not be in it for, like, the strategy of which job is better. It would be like, what does this character look stupidest in? Yeah. And that would be the choice.
Well, they look pretty stupid to begin with, I'm not gonna lie.
You're not a fan of the little chibis?
Look, all of the backgrounds, like the painted backgrounds and the towns and stuff, lovely. Beautiful. Really striking, especially playing it on the quote-unquote big screen. But the giant head chibi characters, not even really fully animated in, like, any cutscenes, right? Just, like, standing around talking, they don't move at all, are really weird.
They don't move at all? They don't even, like,
I mean, they move a little.
Bobble around?
Okay, sure. They bobble around a little, but it's like they don't...
Okay.
They just stand there. On, like, a flat set. Like, they're puppets, basically.
Are these, like, cutscenes?
Yeah. But they're not cutscenes. They're, like...
Are they, like, party chats?
No, all the talking happens in, like, Fire Emblem style... Old Fire Emblem style presentation. Except that it's their whole bodies, and they have giant heads. And they're a little weird.
That's interesting. There's not just, like, normal cutscenes?
Maybe there are. I didn't encounter any in the demo.
I guess it doesn't go from, like, the beginning of the game.
It doesn't.
Right.
From what I read, there are not that many animated cutscenes in the full game either, though.
Yeah, this is definitely a style that's, like, carried over from the original game.
Mm-hmm.
They definitely have some, like, full, like, the original game have, like, some full, like, 3D animated, like, introductions to the characters. But then again, like, on the DS, like, whatever, characters can look like whatever.
Well, that was the big vibe I got is... Okay, so the first two games came out for the 3DS, and this one obviously now is for the Switch. And so the vibe I got was, okay, maybe this wouldn't bother me as much if I was... Oh, I think this is a lie. But maybe this wouldn't bother me as much in handheld. Or maybe this wouldn't bother me as much as, like, a mobile game, right?
What bothers me about Bravely Default 2 is, like, the models look good, right? Like, they're, like, sleek and, like, textured and, like, have detail. And then they're just, like, these weird chibi proportions.
Yeah.
Right? Like, in the DS ones, they, like, have the weird chibi proportions, and also they're kind of pixely, because it's on the DS, right? So it looks like a DS game. It has the DS aesthetic to it. So what bothers me about the models is that they're nice looking, as opposed to, like, they look like DS models. You know?
It's a weird critique, but it's absolutely spot on.
I mean, it's like, I don't like the art style, and when it's rendered nicely, that just becomes more clear.
Yeah, it does sort of feel like this is a bit of a campy art style to begin with, and the better it looks, the less effective it is. It's like, haha, silly chibi kids.
Yeah.
It didn't bother me that much. Not that nothing particularly serious happened in this part of the game. But I imagine serious things have to happen eventually. And it would be weird to watch these little, like... They have the proportions of baby dolls, basically, chatting about anything serious in this kind of like very 2D staged way in scenes. But a lot of the reviews I read talked about this being a game, and, you know, some reviewers talked about this, and then the way some comments talked about this, being kind of stuck in the past. And this always devolves in comment section into, like, the reviewer doesn't actually like RPGs. Which always makes me roll my eyes, but maybe I don't like RPGs, who knows. This one got a lot of flack for just feeling like it's really grindy, and that grind isn't actually very rewarding. And also, the way some of the boss fights are set up is not especially fair. That you really have to grind it? What is the past...
Grinded.
What is the past tense for the video game use of grind?
That's a good question.
Listeners, let me know. Anyway, you really have to have grinded ground for a long time to get certain abilities, and despite the fact there are all these jobs, sometimes it really does feel like there are only a few ways you can set up your characters that you're realistically going to be able to beat these, like, Damage Sponge. I saw Damage Sponge in, like, 20 reviews. I didn't read 20 reviews. I saw Damage Sponge in, like, 3 reviews. Bosses. Which, you know, is sort of disappointing.
I definitely don't like when RPGs use just really high hit points to make something more difficult, for sure.
Yeah. But there was a lot of, you know, made me think a little bit about what is the correct use of the grind in games. Because the commenters are right to point out that it's certainly an integral part of the, like, 90s JRPG experience in particular, and that kind of caliber of game. And while there are a lot of classics that people hold on to from their childhood, hello, Final Fantasy VII, were all of those games actually good, or was it just a product of a different time? And we can see that kind of
My general
here.
opinion on grinding these days is I don't want to have to backtrack to grind. I would like to be able to go through a section and fight every single enemy in it, right? Not like skip enemies, like fight everything in it and have that be my grinding, right? And like if you don't fight all the enemies, then you have to deal with being underleveled. But I don't want to have to like go back and forth in a hallway to, you know, grind out some levels or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like there are a couple of different things to complain about. I mean, obviously I think grinding is bad when it's a microtransaction generator, right?
Right, yeah.
That's not the case here at all. But I'll put that in a separate category of grinding as it is sometimes being implemented either as a microtransaction generator or just as a like game padding, which you can sometimes see like a time padding. Which again, I don't really think is the objective of the grinding in Bravely Default from a development perspective.
Yeah, I think sometimes it depends on, like, the priority. Like, they're clearly very proud of their battle system, right?
Yeah.
So, they want you to engage with their Bravely Default system.
Definitely. And then it's just a matter of... Well, I wonder if you feel differently about grinding in games that you are playing on your television versus games that you are playing in mobile. I mean, not that anyone is the percentage of people who are playing on their Switch on public transit these days is probably a lot lower than it was 2 years ago. But I can certainly, and I read several reviewers who felt this way, I can see the appeal of a game that is grindy if it's a game that's really, you're thinking of it being played on someone's commute or before bed or something like that. And not to knock that, that's a worthy thing. I appreciate games to do that with. But that does feel like a weird thing to aspire to with your game. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, your goal is that it's kind of... I don't know. I have mixed feelings.
I don't know if it's the goal. Like, I think, like, if you were developing a game for the DS, you want to be thinking, like, okay, where are people playing this system?
Yeah.
How long do they play it at a time? And then you want to incorporate that into your design, right?
For sure.
So that makes sense to me. And that's not necessarily your goal, but you have to think about the system that you're developing for and how people use it.
And so I think the Switch must present an interesting challenge that way then. Because, like, for example, I pretty much don't play the Switch handheld. I did a little when I was playing Fire Emblem, because it was at a time where I had some, like, longer commute-related things, and it wasn't a game that my boyfriend cared that much about watching, like, every second of, or something like that. But very rarely here do we play the Switch in handheld mode. But it's hard for me. I just don't know if I'm an outlier. I know you play it more in handheld, although not like commuting or anything.
No.
And I wonder what proportion of players play majority which way.
Well, the nice thing built into the Switch, which maybe was like this partially for the DS too, but the nice thing built in the Switch is that you can close out of the game and put your Switch into sleep mode and then open it back up and it will be exactly where you left off regardless of the game. Like, that just built into its programming. So there's less worry about like, oh, the player needs to be able to save or needs clear-cut places to put it down, because they can just pause and close it at any point regardless of whether you put that into your game or not. Which I think eliminates some of the development difficulties there.
For sure. I also feel like games like this this is not meant to malign reviewers at all, right? It's meant to comment on how difficult their job is. But a game that is grindy probably does not come favorably to someone who's having to play it in a week.
Yeah.
So I could certainly, like, it's interesting to think about games like this that particularly don't reward playing through very quickly. Not that any game probably comes across great under those conditions, or ideally under those conditions, but a grindy JRPG, and one that doesn't just, like, give you the option to grind, but one that really requires you to grind to get through it, is certainly just a finger in the eye of the reviewer, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, kind of like weirdly like super nostalgic in a way that seemingly for many people didn't really work, at least in the review sphere. Like trapped both in this kind of 3DS era and in this 90s era in a way that worked for the original and maybe didn't work quite as well here.
Anyway, I'm looking forward to Project Triangle Strategy, which will 100% be the actual title.
You mean Project Triangle Strategy, the JRPG, the traditional JRPG with kind of a morality system?
Yeah. Our mashup.
Uh-oh.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Had a good one.
Oh, man. That sucks. I hadn't thought about that until really just now.
I mean, that basically is the mashup. They've done it. They looked at Infamous and was like, how can we bring this to our traditional JRPG? No, they didn't. There's plenty of traditional JRPGs with morality systems.
Okay, so I need like a JRPG that's about superheroes. What I really want to do here is try to find a way to meld the overlap here.
My Hero Academia.
Stop it.
Mean.
No. The My Hero Academia game isn't even the style, so we could do that. That's fine. But
I would play a My Hero Academia JRPG, or I wouldn't necessarily want to play as Deku, but I would play as, they should really retool the Hogwarts game into a UA game, is what I'm trying to say.
That'd be dope.
Right?
Maybe. I don't know. For better or for worse? For worse, definitely. Hogwarts definitely has a more fleshed out world than UA.
Well, it's because it's the real world. I guess My Hero Academia is also the real world. Never mind. You're right. The mystical fantasy land of Great Britain.
Yes, fake Britain and fake Japan.
Yes.
Okay. So, what do we have to have here? There has to be a morality system. There has to be a kind of a pulpy, over-the-top story.
There's got to be 4 characters.
There have to be 4 characters. I like that. We need to have some kind of a power progression system.
They all have to be Scottish.
Sure. Why not? They're all Scottish. That's a strong choice. That's great. We'll get memed at least.
They don't have to all be Scottish.
3 of them are Scottish.
Just one of them.
One of them unexplainably is not Scottish. We don't ever address it. I'm thinking, is there a way that we could set up a world where the superheroes could change their powers? Is there a superhero equivalent of the job system that makes any sense to you as our... Look, you're our climbing expert, but I also want this to make sense. You're just our make sense person.
Okay. You could have some sort of, a black market for powers, some sort of, supplement you can take that gives you powers, for, a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't always, they've only got what they've got on sale, right?
Right.
Just go full JRPG, there's, a class system, right? So, these things are meant for, the aristocracy, the sky-high folks,
This can't be a sky-high game, but continue.
But no, there's, the floating city where all the noblemen are, flying around and, showing off their fire powers or whatever. And then there's the people on the ground that get, these supplements through, black market, in order to, make their lives easier or do jobs better or be bandits or whatever.
Okay. So then we have people who are abusing these. We have, a all-for-one situation, if you're my hero person. We have these people that are... I'm thinking of these as injectables, and I probably shouldn't, right? Like
lollipops or something.
Dope. That's appropriately chibi. Yeah, so the people who are abusing these, they're taking 10 lollipops at once, super-powered ones, and they're a gang that's gonna wreak havoc on the city, and our band of 4 merry heroes needs to develop their own powers and their sense of good and evil while tracking down the 4 sources of all power. I tried to track down 4 of something to take down these super villains. In the end, though, these super villains really have the motivation to bring down the aristocracy class, and so you need to decide whether it's going to be better to eat the rich, basically, or whether you believe that eating the rich is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it should probably be more there's an option to get rid of these powers for everyone.
Yeah.
Right? Or you keep them, but
right, keeping them perpetuates the system of inequality that already exists. But also probably makes people's lives harder in the short to medium term if you get rid of it.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I can even build in something like the Brave Default system too, where they can't be lollipops, right? Come on. But
whatever, there's something, okay? There's something child-friendly.
Okay, so the lollipops, the longer you hold them, the more of the power energy they gather, and so you have to use them at strategic moments. Many times you want to fight, you want to save them, right?
So you want to be standard fantasy person with your sword.
Exactly, and you can only use these superpower powers sparingly.
I think that's okay. It's got some holes, but that's okay. We could fill them in.
I don't think they can be fantasy people. I think we need to build it more it needs to be more Industrial Revolution-y or something.
Whatever. They've got normal weapons.
Yeah.
In addition to powers. That's what I meant.
Are there guns? That feels like a big decision point. for any type of game. It's like, is this a gun world?
Maybe it's more of like a sci-fi aesthetic. That's not pulling from either of them, but I think that fits with like the consumable power concept.
Yeah. I like that.
So yeah, they have guns, but they're like space guns.
Perfect. All right.
You know, space guns.
That was reasonably successful.
Yeah.
And it'll come out for Nintendo Switch as soon as Sucker Punch hires Emma to produce this game for them.
I will make things climbable for you.
Oh, you can climb in the game.
Yeah. There's going to be a big sequence where you have to like climb all the way up to the floating city. Like a big set piece.
I like it. Oh, and probably you can choose to use your powers in the overworld as well to make traveling the overworld easier, but that means you sacrifice being able to use them in battle.
Yeah.
There's some interesting boss fights with interesting difficulty we could set up from that.
Yeah.
Intriguing.
There's probably some that are just for traversal or just for battle so that you don't use all of them.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, like, maybe there are certain boss fights where there are ones that you have to use to get there, but that means that those ones will necessarily be restricted for use in the fight.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, watch out for that mashup, or for alternate mashup Project Triangle Strategy on the Nintendo Switch sometime soon. But thanks for listening to this episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
If you liked what you listened to, you should follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. So check us out there for all the latest, and visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat that Emma is about to pull from, and also read our blog, featuring a long-running series, Click My Boyfriend, where my boyfriend is playing the comic book series, or JRPG, your take, Kingdom Hearts. And we're watching My Hero Academia and Coffee Prince on split screen. So check those out for sure, in addition to all of the other good blog content. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, if you like the show, you should subscribe. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online in the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Podcast Addict, Podcast. Anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. Next week on the show, it's our last 6 weeks in gaming. I realize I started the show by talking about the fact that it is May, but I can't believe it's our 6 weeks in gaming already again, as I can't believe it every 6 weeks. But Emma, in 2 weeks, what are we going to be discussing?
Well, our old game is going to be Psychonauts.
Dope.
Which I'm 95% sure we haven't talked about. Oh well. And our new game is going to be Haven.
Nice.
Look forward to that.
So that'll catch that, listeners, in 2 weeks, where we'll try to find... No, I'm not even going to try to mash them together. Give me 2 weeks to come up with a joke. But tune in next week for the side quest. And that's all we've got for you. So, Emma, do you wanna sign off this time?
This week, I hope you and your 3 Scottish friends have a nice adventure.